Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the moment of truth.
Let's pick up on President-elect Trump's comments about Dreamers on the video, the very powerful video that you posted. You heard some of the skepticism on Capitol Hill, but you are really making a call to action. Why are you optimistic this might be a moment when you can get something done?
Well, what he said was really powerful, and he talked about Dreamers in a way that I don't think anybody else has talked about. He said middle age, which that is true. I'm about to be 40 years old. He talked about us being successful. He talked about us being part of this country and this nation. And I think that he understands that the country supports Dreamers, that it's been 23 years that nobody has been able to get this done. And maybe for him, he's seeing this as a legacy.
I know that some of you might have decided to vote for Trump as a big middle finger to the Democrats for prioritizing everybody else over black citizens, and that's fine. I don't criticize you for that, but I also made it clear I could never vote for Trump because I didn't see him offering us anything. And also, I don't believe that he would follow through with any of his grandiose promises or even his rhetoric about mass deportations. It would be nice if he actually went through with it, but I'm not giving him credit for things that he didn't do during his first term. He had a track record of going back on the big promises that he makes, so politically speaking, I would only believe it when I saw it. And not to mention, political priorities change depending on whatever's going on at the time. Here you have an illegal alien who eventually became naturalized, and she's a full-throated advocate only for her group and no one else. I don't hear any concern or acknowledgement of anyone else. And yet you'll have Negroes in the white media and other bootlicks like the NAACP campaigning for these same people to be made naturalized citizens or otherwise get some sort of amnesty, even though these people in many cases come from countries that have practiced open, often violent anti-black racism to this very day, and who bring those same attitudes and behaviors here. And I think it's significant that the white media is reporting on this now and doing it in the way that they are. You see, they've been sucking up to the orange man ever since he won re-election. And their tone towards him has begun to soften, you'll notice. Hell, some of NBC's so-called talent, like Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, have just dropped the anti-Trump line altogether, and they went to kiss Trump's rump in person. Over at ABC, you see that they're making nice. They went ahead and paid Trump a $15 million bonus, if you will, because they were settling that lawsuit that Trump had for defamation. Now, they could have fought it, and they would have won. But this is a matter of the fact that they're trying to make nice with the orange man. This is not a matter of whether or not that $15 million ought to be paid. It's a matter of you're trying to get in good with the guy who's about to be president. All of these white media companies, including the ones who claim to be so leftist and so liberal, they want Trump's FCC to relax restrictions on them. They are businesses, after all. That way they can gobble up more of the media landscape. So for them, from a business standpoint, a second Trump presidency has a lot of advantages. So don't kid yourself. It's more than just illegal aliens who are hoping to make a deal with Trump. Now, you may think the idea of these people actually making a deal with Trump is ridiculous, but keep in mind this woman already said that they had spoken with Trump before and he was sympathetic to them 10 years ago. And you can also believe that Trump would never make a deal with these guys, but what needs to be remembered is that he didn't build that much ballyhooed border wall either, and he also never cracked down on the employers, landlords, and banks who make billions of dollars off of illegal immigration. Because those three entities, the employers, landlords, and banks, are the ones who provide the economic infrastructure that incentivizes all of this mass migration in the first place. They're coming here because they know that there's going to be someone who will hire them. They also know that some unscrupulous landlord will provide them with a roof over their heads, and they can go ahead and send money back home or just keep it for themselves because there are banks who fought for legislation to make it where they can just go ahead and freely take money, no questions asked. Now understand something. The argument that these so-called Dreamers and DACA charity cases are making is not based on race. Do you notice that? They're not making any claims that they're people of color or minorities or whatever. They're dropping that. You notice that? They're making a strictly nationality-based claim. White power has always hazed those who it later makes into subsets of white. This is what it was with Hispanics. They've been classified as quote-unquote white all the way up until Richard Nixon decided to change it. And they've been trying to get that white card back ever since. And for a lot of them, they think they might be on the cusp of reclaiming it. That's why I posted that video a couple of weeks ago talking about whether or not the Black-Brown Alliance was going to be resurrected. And that's because you got a lot of these folk, illegal aliens no less, who understand the rules of racism as far as they're concerned. They've been here long enough to understand that white power just might go ahead and pretend to offer them a spot if they show their allegiance to anti-black racism. These white supremacists are making the first major step towards declaring that all of these illegals who have come from anti-black cultures can get put on the team. And as we've seen on so many occasions, most of them have been campaigning for a place under white supremacy from the very jump. And as this woman herself said, they've listened to how Trump talked about them, and that she and her cohorts had spoken to Trump about this very issue in 2013, and that he was sympathetic to them.
That meeting we had with him in 2013, we had a 45-minute discussion. And we shared our story. He asked a lot of questions. And as we were leaving, he said, "You convinced me." So I'm hoping that he remembers that. I heard people that he has mentioned this meeting. And I think deep down inside, he got to hear our stories. And so maybe there will be a little bit of disconnect between what he wants and what his advisors want. And I really hope that he just moves forward with what he said on Sunday.
And no, I don't think that's just a bunch of hot air from her or just wishful thinking on her part. I think the reason that she and her pals aren't full-on attacking Trump is because she and her cohorts have been made certain assurances that no matter what their public rhetoric may be, they're willing to drop all of it if they can get assurances from the illegals on how they'll behave socially when it comes to black people. These guys have all kinds of behind-the-scenes and backdoor conversations with white power, and that's part of the reason why so many of them, even though they're not even legally in the country, yet they make common cause with white supremacy and echo all of their lines. Another thing, you'll also notice how now nobody's coming to these legal aliens and telling them, well, before we can talk about legalizing you guys or any sort of DACA stuff, we have to have a study first. We need a study. We got to have some public hearings. They're not doing that. This isn't about whether white power likes them or not. White power doesn't even like all of the Western Europeans, the ones who are usually talking about when they say white. The Nazis made deals with Imperial Japan, even going so far as to call the Japanese honorary Aryans, though this was a political label, not a racial one. White power looks to see who will be useful to it in the subjugation of black people, which is the foundation and central pillar of white supremacy. Anti-black racism is the sine qua non of white power. It is the absolute indispensable factor that must be there no matter what. And this is why you have these brown people from south of the border who are no longer bringing that Latin pride talk or bragging about how the values of their home countries are what built America. Instead, women like this, she's singing a brand new tune that basically they're as American as anyone else, despite being in the U.S. illegally. And you notice that she didn't say the word multicultural, and she definitely didn't say the word diverse. Oh, how the rhetoric has changed, not just from the white media, but from a lot of these other folk too. Notice that? So contrary to what the diehard MAGAs may think, contrary to what Trump administration hardliners like racist archfiend Stephen Miller may think, Trump, in my opinion, is open to making some sort of deal on this issue, which would equate to amnesty in all but name. Family, we've seen this before. There were a large number of organizations in the 19th century dedicated to, quote-unquote, protecting Irish immigrants who came to the U.S. to escape the famine in their own country and to try to promote the well-being of Irish immigrants. And the oppression of the British was also something they were hoping to get away from, but no sooner than they had set foot here on America's shores, they immediately made common cause with the cousins of those same British oppressors. And they couldn't wait to be on team white supremacy. This while they were being oppressed by those same British in their home country. But that didn't stop them from being anti-black, did it? The Irish who became cops and who became politicians were and remain among the most virulently and violently anti-black segments of American society. And the same thing happened in the 20th century with the Greeks and most notably the Italians. The Italians had been socially ostracized and called names and all the rest of it. They were not qualified as white until almost mid-century. There were many organizations and groups that the Italian Americans created for the sake of promoting their own civil rights, as they called it. They even had the Italian American Civil Rights League, of all things, trying to do their own clumsy imitation of genuine civil rights organizations. Now, this also went on all the way into the 1970s, mind you, and yet at the exact same time they were talking about Italian civil rights for themselves, they were busy denigrating black people and depriving black Americans of our rights. And the politicians who came from those Italian-American enclaves did just like the Irish before them and made it a point to define themselves by showing how violently anti-black they could be. And the same thing goes for the people who came from those former Soviet bloc countries, people like Mika the bigot Brzezinski and others. White power has traditionally pretended to give honorary Aryan status to most groups that it encounters, except for one. There's been one group who has never and can never be classified as honorary white, honorary Aryan, honorary European, or honorary anything. And that's black people. The very non-white group who these white supremacists have had the most contact with, and yet are the only ones who these white supremacists say are not honorary anything. And all these other groups see this, and they recognize why that is, and they see that as an opportunity for themselves. The people who white power hazes and ostracizes, they understand that so long as they're not classified as black, that means sooner or later they might have entree to be on the team, and that's why they're all going for it no matter what. If there's one thing we should have recognized by now, is that no matter how much white supremacy seems to be completely and thoroughly focused on everyone else, they always got black people in the back of their empty little minds. Whatever agenda it is that they're working on, they're always looking and asking themselves, how does this hurt black people? How can we turn this to hurt black people? How can we find a way to twist it so that it attacks black people? Even if it looks like they're focusing solely on those illegal aliens, they're also looking and wondering, but how can we do this in a way that's going to harm black people? How can we go ahead and make sure that this attacks them somehow? They're always thinking about that. And that's the reason why we've noticed over the decades, they always seem to make these rather strange deals with the very people that they were just fighting with. Whether it be with the British, or whether it be with the people from Ireland, whether or not it be with people from Japan, whether or not it be with people from Vietnam. Every time it seems that they're fighting with some folk, next thing you know, they throw open the gates for them. Why? Because they notice that a lot of these people and a lot of these groups are actually willing foot soldiers for the anti-black agenda. So that being the case, they can be made into useful idiots for white supremacy. That's the pattern, that's the MO that white supremacy has always followed. Immigrants understand the rules of racism. Too many black people choose not to. We can't allow ourselves to conflate our refusal to play the fool for the Democrats with the idea that Trump is somehow our friend. Even Richard Spencer, the white supremacist fiend, said that his now defunct alt-right would not come into its own until they disagreed with Trump. Even that crying Nazi at the Charlottesville riots said that he wanted someone more radical than Trump, because as he put it, he didn't want a president who would give his daughter to a Jew. So even the bad guys who themselves were marching for Trump and killing for Trump, they weren't about to be his fanboys. They had their own agenda, and they recognized that regardless of how much they may have liked Trump's rhetoric or that they had enemies in common, that didn't mean that Trump was willing to go as far as they wanted him to, and as far as they were concerned, that was a problem. Politics is about deal-making, and no matter what this or that politician may say, the deal they make will ultimately come down to what they think is in their own personal interests. Let's not kid ourselves. If Ronald Reagan's 1986 amnesty is anything to go by, the Republicans are far more likely to try to make a deal so that they can avoid mass deportations as opposed to go through with it.
I want to ask you about Dreamers, because the president-elect told me he wants to work with Democrats on a deal to protect Dreamers. Do you believe Dreamers will have a path to legal status by the end of President-elect Trump's second term?
Only if we clean up the border. I was on the Gang of Eight bill doing comprehensive immigration. I've been on every Dreamer bill there is. But what's happened under President Biden, you've allowed 13 million people come in here legally. Until we deport people here illegally, why would you legalize any? If you legalize one person now, there'd be a run on the border. There will be no legalization. There will be no Dreamer bill until we lock our border down. And the number one job for the Budget Committee in the United States Senate is to pass a border security bill on day one. I want to cut taxes, but that comes later. To my friends in the House, we're playing Russian roulette with our national security. Terrorists are all over the place trying to get into the country. 250 people die a day of fentanyl poisoning. What we will do in the Senate is come up with a border bill supported by Stephen Miller and President Trump to lock down the border, create agents to deport people, bed space so they don't have to be released, and finish the wall. That's what we're going to do. If we don't do that first, it's national security malpractice. Secure the border first. Any legalization has to come after you secure your border.
People in the House, they got to understand we want to cut taxes, but we may not be able to do that. What he's saying is basically go ahead and give me an opening so I can say, well, we can't do it because of taxes. That's what he was really saying. There was no reason for him to bring that up. He should have just said we're doing this no matter what. But instead, he's sitting here bringing up taxes. So that's going to be the excuse that gets used later on. Lindsey Graham says that there's not going to be a deal made on a Dreamer bill unless the border is locked down. So you got a ranking Republican saying that he's fully willing to make a deal as far as the Dreamers are concerned, which means amnesty. So long as he can go back to his constituents and claim that they did something on the border. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the moment some do-nothing legislation gets passed and they fund a few more miles of border fence and a handful of additional Border Patrol agents, any talk of mass deportations will quietly go away and the issue will be allowed to die a natural death. Republicans are going to control the entire government next month. They're going to have control of the House, the Senate, the presidency, and the Supreme Court. They are bound by nothing. They have front-loaded all levels of government with a whole bunch of right-wing ideologues. They don't need the Democrats to pass anything. And yet Lindsey Graham is not talking about how they're going to ramrod their agenda through. Instead, he's talking as if they're already hamstrung. He's already talking about what they can't do and the circumstances under which they can't do it. Republicans have all that smoke for culture war crap, like teaching that slavery was a benefit and banning books that have black people in them, but when it comes to anything else, they suddenly become helpless, even when they control all the levers of power. So you see what the Republicans' actual agenda is, and this is supposed to be the group of Republicans that Trump is going to be quote-unquote working with. The excuse making by the GOP has already begun, and they're not even formally back in power yet. So history and the nature of white supremacy point to this being the direction things are going to go. The statements these politicians make are mostly used to control public opinion, to quiet down the masses and keep them pacified. Now, is it possible that outcry from the people who oppose this slippery slope could pressure Trump into sticking to what he said? Of course that's possible. There's certainly a possibility, and public pressure has worked in the past. But tell me, has the Orange Man honored his word to black people better than other politicians? Or has he been more blatant and direct with his antipathy? Don't make a saint out of a sinner. Like Joe Biden, Donald Trump is a racist who we know from experience to be a liar. We should not be depending on the Republicans to save us, because they've never done so before. And neither has Trump. If you want to say at least that he made some promises that the Democrats were never willing to make, that's fine. But people should not give Trump credit for things he hasn't actually done. If you're prepared to pat him on the back because of some of the promises that he's made and ignore the fact that he's clearly been having closed-door chats with the very people who he says he's going to be cracking down on, if you believe that Donald Trump's word and his word alone is a solid foundation to put faith in him, then those DACA advocates aren't the dreamers. The real dreamer is you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Tomorrow Boyd, Jerome Simmons, Wen, Jerlene Harris, and Reginald Britt. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.